Welcome. Today, as every Tuesday, we explore the secrets of psychology, health, and personal development to help you reach your full potential. We've received some really powerful source material this week. It's from a leading metabolic health expert, and it focuses on a strategy that makes two absolutely massive claims.
Huge claims, yeah.
One, that it can prevent, get this, 80% of chronic diseases, and two, that it can dramatically enhance your daily cognition, your focus, your clarity.
We're basically talking about fundamentally changing how your body fuels itself.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today is to do a real deep dive into the science here. We're looking at glucose control and therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, specifically the ketogenic diet.
Right.
We want to understand why this approach, which is actually centuries old, is kind of being rediscovered now as this ultimate tool for performance, yes, but also for managing chronic disease.
And we're going to start with a truth that might be a bit frustrating for many people listening, which is, for the vast majority of us, what looks healthy? Well, it often isn't actually healthy.
Right. And the metabolic damage, the real problem, it starts much, much earlier than we tend to realize.
Well, let's talk about the personal story behind this research because it's so relatable. The expert, he grew up doing everything right,
Everything you was told, yeah.
constantly exercising, eating the recommended low-fat, high-carb diet, the whole thing. And yet, he still became clinically obese, weighed 255 pounds,
Wow.
and was later diagnosed with a chronic disease that his doctors basically said was irreversible. It's like the ultimate betrayal of conventional wisdom, isn't it?
It really is. And, sometimes that kind of personal failure is the best catalyst, isn't it, for rethinking everything.
Absolutely.
And what the research he dug into clearly shows is how quickly this metabolic disruption takes hold. It's not just about becoming obese later in life. The moment the body starts accumulating excess fat tissue, even small amounts, insulin levels rise
Oh.
instantly.
Instantly, not gradually.
Instantly. And this isn't just happening at, extreme weights. This early accumulation can dramatically reduce your insulin sensitivity by about 34 to 35%, very early on.
That's quite a drop. And when you look at the bigger picture, the statistics, this isn't just an individual struggle, is it? It feels like a generational crisis.
Oh, absolutely.
We've got over 20% of children now dealing with obesity. That number has quadrupled in just 3 decades.
Quadruple. It's staggering.
And for adults, it's approaching 7 out of 10 people in America being obese today. 7 out of 10.
So to really get a grip on the mechanics of this damage, we need to be clear about insulin, what it actually does.
Okay.
You can think of insulin almost like the thermostat for your blood glucose. Its main job, its life-saving job, is to strictly regulate the amount of sugar in your bloodstream.
Which isn't very much, right?
It's about 1 teaspoon, just one crucial teaspoon that needs to be kept in a very tight range. If that sugar level goes too high, it damages your tissues, your blood vessels.
And if it goes too low?
Well, if it drops too low, that can be fatal pretty quickly. So the body is constantly fighting, adjusting to maintain that narrow life-saving balance.
Okay, so if that insulin system, that glucose regulation, is so fundamental to life, what's the single best measure we should be tracking? If our main goal is improving long-term health, especially considering heart disease is the #1 killer.
Right. That's the critical question, isn't it? The single strongest predictor we have for cardiovascular disease, but also for eye disease like retinopathy and kidney disease. It's your HbA1c.
HbA1c, can you break that down?
Yeah, it stands for hemoglobin A1c. And it essentially gives you an average picture of your blood glucose levels over the previous 2 or 3 months.
So it's not just a snapshot like a finger prick test.
Exactly. It's the long-term trend. And think of it this way. If your glucose control is unregulated, meaning your HbA1c is high or swings wildly, that's like the engine of your health being broken. Trying to optimize other things, focusing on supplements or specific superfoods without fixing that glucose control. It's like polishing the rims on your car when the chassis is cracked.
So glucose control sits right at the very top.
Right at the very top of the health pyramid. It's foundational.
Okay, so if the engine is glucose control, we have to talk about the fuel that most powerfully affects that engine.
Yeah.
And that's carbohydrates, right?
That's the most potent factor, yes. Which brings us directly to this idea of therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, or TCR. And the most well-known form of that is, of course, the ketogenic diet.
Now, keto gets a lot of hype, a lot of criticism too, but you mentioned earlier it's not actually new.
Not at all. And this is often overlooked. People think it's some modern fad, maybe for weight loss or something invented on Instagram. The very first published report using carbohydrate reduction specifically to resolve diabetes.
Yeah.
That was in 1796.
Wow, 1796.
Yes. And the top diabetologists, the leading experts, they used these very strict low-carb strategies for over a century, right up until insulin was discovered in 1921.
So they were managing diabetes with diet before insulin injections existed.
Precisely. And even after insulin became available, the ketogenic diet itself continued to be used, interestingly, for neurological disorders,
Yeah.
like treating seizures in children,
Uh-huh.
because it mimics the metabolic state of fasting, which was known to help.
Okay, but let's tackle the perception issue, because when people hear keto, they often picture like just steak, bacon, butter, cheese, maybe some pork rinds. It sounds pretty unhealthy to a lot of
Right,
folks.
and that perception is a huge hurdle. It's often based on poorly formulated versions of the diet. So what does a well-formulated ketogenic diet actually look like in practice? How does it avoid just being, processed fats?
Yeah.
That's a really crucial distinction. A well-formulated approach isn't about unlimited bacon. It's fundamentally about removing the things that spike your blood sugar and insulin the most. So refined sugars, obviously, but also starchy carbs.
Like bread, pasta.
Exactly. Bagels, white rice, pasta, potatoes, most processed cereals. Because these things rapidly elevate blood sugar, and critically, they cause a big insulin spike. And high insulin essentially shuts down your body's ability to burn its own stored fat for energy.
So what replaces those carbs?
Nutrient-dense whole foods, lots of green leafy vegetables, think broccoli, asparagus, cauliflower, spinach. Adequate protein, but not excessive amounts, from sources like fish, eggs, poultry, maybe some meat. And then healthy fats.
From where?
Things like olive oil, avocados themselves, nuts and seeds in moderation. The goal isn't just eat fat. It's to keep insulin low enough that your body becomes efficient at producing and using ketones, which are made from fat, as its primary fuel source instead of glucose.
Okay, that sounds more balanced. Now, connecting this back to the challenge of chronic disease, let's look at type 1 diabetes. You mentioned the standard expectation is pretty grim.
It is. Under standard medical care, which usually involves managing high-carb intake with insulin, 99% of type 1 patients are expected to have high and variable glucose levels pretty much for life.
And what are the real-world consequences of that poor control, especially starting young?
Well, they're swift and, frankly, devastating. In children with type 1, this poor glucose control leads to measurable neuroanatomical changes, actual shifts in the white and gray matter of their brains within as little as 3 years.
3 years? That's terrifying.
It is. And within just 4 years, we start seeing early signals of atherosclerotic progression. That means their blood vessels are already becoming rigid and stiffening up. It's basically accelerating the risk of heart disease decades ahead of schedule.
And the eyes.
Historically, before more recent advances, most type 1 patients were unfortunately expected to develop significant eye damage, called retinopathy, within about 20 years. Poor glucose control is just toxic to small blood vessels.
But the research on using therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, keto, for type 1 seems to offer a completely different outcome. You mentioned a 10-year case study.
Yes, it's a really remarkable study. This individual with type 1 diabetes followed a well-formulated ketogenic diet for 10 years.
Yeah.
And the results? They maintained normal, healthy glycemic control, a stable engine throughout that entire decade.
Without wild swings?
Exactly. Normal HbA1c levels. And they significantly reduced their daily insulin requirement by over 40%. Less reliance on injected insulin.
Okay, that's amazing. But here's the kicker you mentioned. Their LDL cholesterol nearly doubled. And in conventional medicine, that sets off huge alarm bells, right? Danger, danger.
Massive red flags go up, absolutely. LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol, doubling that number would typically be seen as a major increase in cardiovascular risk.
So how do we square that circle? Perfect glucose control, way less insulin needed, but sky-high LDL.
Yeah.
What did their actual cardiovascular health look like?
This is where it gets really interesting and challenges the dogma. Despite that significantly higher LDL number, their actual markers of cardiovascular health, things like arterial stiffness, scans looking for plaque, inflammation markers, they were actually better than average compared to the general population.
Better than average, even with double the LDL.
Yes, which strongly suggests, well, it forces us to question if LDL count alone is the right way to assess risk in the context of excellent metabolic health.
So are you suggesting that maybe, just maybe, fixing the glucose control, getting the metabolic engine running smoothly might be more important for heart health than just the LDL number itself? Because that really goes against decades of standard cardiology advice.
It does challenge it. The evidence from studies like this and others, suggests that the context matters hugely. The type of LDL particle, the level of inflammation, the presence of insulin resistance and glucose damage. These seem to be far more predictive of actual risk than just the raw LDL cholesterol count. This study powerfully illustrates that fixing the root metabolic dysfunction, getting that glucose engine under control, may actually trump other traditional single risk factors like LDL count. When it comes to long-term cardiovascular health, it's about the whole picture, not just one number.
Okay, that's a huge paradigm shift to consider. It seems the potential benefits go way beyond just managing or reversing disease then. What about performance? Cognitive performance, physical performance?
Absolutely. We look beyond disease reversal towards just optimizing normal human function. Think about what happens when the brain switches its primary fuel source.
From glucose to ketone.
Exactly. Many people who adopt this way of eating, or even just use exogenous ketones sometimes, report this major boost in mental clarity. Better focus, better articulation, less brain fog.
Why?
Well, think about the alternative. High-carb meals often lead to energy swings, right? You eat pasta, or say even just an orange. Your blood sugar spikes up.
You're good for a bit.
Yep. Then the insulin kicks in to bring it down. But often, the body overshoots. It releases a bit too much insulin, and your blood sugar crashes down too low. That's called reactive hypoglycemia.
That feels awful.
Yeah, that's the classic crash. You feel jittery, maybe anxious, definitely fatigued, can't concentrate, and you get intense cravings for more carbs to bring your sugar back up. That's a roller coaster.
Right. I know that feeling.
So ketones, derived from fat, offer a much steadier, more stable fuel source for the brain. Think of glucose like, I don't know, cheap gasoline, quick bursts, but then sputters and stalls. Ketones are more like a high-octane, clean-burning fuel.
Is there research on that brain stability?
Yes, actually. A fascinating study from 2020 directly compared the effects. It showed that consuming ketones significantly increased the stability of brain networks, whereas consuming glucose actually decreased stability.
Decreased it.
Yes. The ketone consumption resulted in something like 87% greater network stability in the brain. What does that mean in real life? Consistency, sustained focus, clearer thinking, better articulation, less mental fatigue.
Okay, 87%. That's a massive difference. What about physical performance? For decades, the dogma in sports was carbs, carbs, carbs. You needed a carbo load for energy.
That was absolutely the prevailing wisdom, yeah. And many early studies on ketogenic diets did seem to show impaired athletic performance, which reinforced that idea.
So why was that?
The main issue was the duration of the studies. They were often too short. The body needs time to fully adapt its metabolic machinery to become really efficient at burning fat for fuel, especially at higher intensities. This adaptation period takes at least 4 weeks, sometimes longer.
So they were testing people before they were fully fat adapted.
Exactly. But when researchers did studies properly, allowing for that full 4-week adaptation period, the results were quite different. One key study had well-trained athletes adapt for 4 weeks and then tested them doing really demanding high-intensity sprints, 6 rounds of 800 meters. Very glucose-dependent type of exercise, supposedly.
And what happened to their performance?
There was absolutely no deterioration. They performed just as well as they did on their high-carb diet, even in those intense bursts.
No drop-off at all, even without the carbs.
None. And what was really groundbreaking was when they measured their fuel usage. These athletes recorded the highest rates of fat oxidation, fat burning ever reported in the scientific literature during exercise.
Even during high intensity?
Even at 85% of their maximum oxygen consumption, their VO2 max. They were primarily burning fat even at intensities previously thought to absolutely require carbohydrates. It completely overturned the old thinking.
So the body, once it's flexible, can learn to burn fat, even for pretty intense effort.
Precisely. It proves the body is incredibly adaptable. And once metabolically flexible, it can utilize fat far more effectively than previously believed.
Okay, but that 4-week adaptation, that's a commitment. For people who are maybe intrigued by the cognitive benefits or the anti-inflammatory aspects, but aren't ready for that full dietary overhaul, is there a shortcut? You mentioned exogenous ketones.
Right, that's where things like ketone esters or salts, like 1,3-butanediol, come in. Consuming these can rapidly shift your metabolism into using ketones within minutes without needing the strict diet change.
And what are the studied benefits of those?
Well, research is ongoing, but they're being linked to several interesting effects. Improved cognition is one. A study showed they helped attenuate cognitive decline in patients at risk for Alzheimer's over a 6-month period.
Okay.
They also seem to have significant anti-inflammatory effects. Specifically, they've been shown to block something called the NLRP3 inflammasome. You can kind of think of that as a master switch for inflammation in the body.
Blocking the inflammation switch. That sounds useful.
Potentially very useful for a lot of conditions. And another interesting finding is muscle preservation. Exogenous ketones seem to reduce muscle protein breakdown, which could help preserve muscle mass, even during periods of calorie restriction or stress.
Okay, so lots of potential benefits there, whether through diet or supplements. Let's bring this down to the practical level. For someone listening, just trying to optimize their everyday life, what does all this mean? Where should they start?
Well, before even thinking about specific diets like keto, the foundational pillars have to be in place. You can't hack your way around the basics.
What are those basics?
Number one, be deeply conscious of what you consume. Really understand that food is information for your body. It's medicine. Or it could be poison. It's not just entertainment or fuel.
Okay, conscious consumption, number 2.
Number two, exercise regularly. And this isn't just about cardio. It absolutely must include resistance training. Lifting weights, aiming for maybe 30 minutes to an hour, perhaps 6 days a week, plus some cardiovascular work.
Why is the weightlifting piece so crucial for this metabolic health picture specifically?
Because muscle tissue is your primary sink for glucose disposal. It's the main place your body stores excess blood sugar safely. When you lift weights, you build new muscle tissue, and you also make your existing muscle cells much more sensitive to insulin.
So you're creating more storage space, essentially.
You're creating more storage space, and you're making the doors to that storage space open more easily. It helps stabilize that whole glucose engine we talked about. Massively important.
Got it. Conscious consumption, resistance training plus cardio. What's pillar 3?
Get good sleep. Prioritize it. It's absolutely fundamental for hormonal balance, including insulin sensitivity, appetite regulation, everything. If you don't have those 3 pillars, food quality, regular exercise with weights, and sufficient sleep corrected, honestly, you're probably wasting your energy focusing on anything more advanced.
Okay, foundations first. Now let's talk about the food environment because it's tough out there. We live surrounded by what some call food noise. Foods that seem engineered to make us eat more.
Oh, they absolutely are engineered. Hyper-palatable foods designed to give you a massive dopamine hit, overriding your natural satiety signals.
Why does shifting to something like a ketogenic diet often seem to dramatically reduce people's appetite and silence that food noise? It seems counterintuitive sometimes.
There are likely 2 main reasons. First, you're getting stable energy. When you're fueled by fat and ketones, you don't have those wild blood sugar swings, the spikes and crashes that trigger that urgent, panicky hunger. You just have steady, sustained fuel.
Okay, stable energy. And the second reason?
Second, you're typically removing the very foods that are engineered to drive overconsumption. These are usually the ultra-processed foods that combine refined carbohydrates, industrial seed oils or unhealthy fats, and salt in ways that nature never does. That combination is incredibly potent at hijacking your brain's reward system and making you crave more, even when you're physically full.
Right, the carb, fat, salt trifecta.
Sure.
So if someone is trying to stabilize their glucose, maybe not going full keto, but just wanting to avoid the worst offenders, what are some unexpected foods that cause surprisingly big glucose spikes?
Yeah, there are definitely some common culprits people think are healthy. Number one is liquid calories,
Like soda.
soda, obviously, but also fruit juice, even 100% fruit juice. And smoothies. People think smoothies are great, packing in fruits and
The
veggies.
guilty as charged.
But the physical act of blending destroys the fiber structure. It removes the natural brakes on sugar absorption. So that sugar hits your bloodstream incredibly fast, much faster than eating the whole fruit. This dramatically alters the hormonal response. You get a huge insulin spike, and often you end up feeling hungrier sooner than if you'd eaten the fruit whole.
Okay, so blending is bad for blood sugar. What else?
Processed starches can be surprisingly problematic. Things like white rice, most breads, and especially potatoes when they're mashed or baked rather than boiled. Their glycemic impact can be really high, sometimes worse than table sugar for the same amount of carbs. Pasta too, for many people.
What about snacks? I often see dried fruit recommended as a healthy alternative to candy.
Be really careful with dried fruit. The drying process removes the water, which concentrates the sugars intensely. A small handful of raisins, for example, will give you a much bigger, faster glucose spike than eating the same number of grapes. The dose and speed are key.
Makes sense. And finally, what about hidden ingredients? Things added to foods we might not expect.
Absolutely need to read labels. Look out for hidden sugars or sugar-like additives. Things like maltitol or maltodextrin are often used in products marketed as zero sugar or low carb.
But they still affect blood sugar.
They can have almost the same, or sometimes even worse, metabolic effect as regular sugar for many people. They're often added purely to enhance the flavor profile and, frankly, to drive consumption. Also, watch for added sugar and sometimes excessive salt in things you wouldn't expect, like bacon, deli meats, or even nut butters again, often just there to make you eat more.
It really feels like you have to be a detective reading labels these days.
You really do. The environment is working against metabolic health for the most part.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. The history, the critical science of glucose control being the engine, the potential of therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, keto for reversing disease and boosting performance, and how to navigate this really challenging modern food environment.
And it is challenging. When you consider the stats that research suggests, over 90% of Americans have some degree of metabolic impairment, whether it's high blood pressure, high blood sugar, poor cholesterol, or excess body fat.
90%. That's almost everyone.
It's the vast majority, which tells us that we really need to reframe how we think about this. Good nutrition and regular exercise, especially resistance training, these shouldn't be seen as optional extras or temporary fixes for a problem. They should be viewed as the normal, foundational requirements for human life.
Like breathing or sleeping.
Exactly. And when we don't treat them as such, when our environment makes it hard to meet those requirements, our health inevitably deteriorates. That's the default outcome now, it seems.
Okay, I want to leave our listeners with a final, perhaps provocative thought, building on all this. Should everyone try the ketogenic diet?
That's always the question, isn't it? Look, the science gives you averages. It tells you what happens for a group of people. On average, some people might try keto and feel okay, maybe see some benefits. Others might not feel great. But the key insight, I think, for the sources we looked at, is the power and necessity of self-experimentation. Because you don't know if you might be one of the outliers.
The person who gets incredible results.
Exactly. You might be the person who experiences not just a small improvement, but maybe that 87% increase in brain stability we talked about, or a complete resolution of lifelong brain fog, or unlocks a level of athletic performance they never thought possible, or reverses a condition they were told was irreversible.
And you won't know unless you try it for yourself properly.
You won't know unless you try. The average outcome doesn't tell your individual story. So the provocative thought is, don't just rely on the averages. Consider experimenting responsibly to find out what truly works for your unique biology.
That's a powerful call to action. Thank you for walking us through all of that. And thank you, our listeners, for joining us for this deep dive into metabolic health. If you found this conversation valuable, please do hit subscribe so you don't miss any of our future analyses.
We really appreciate you being on this journey with us. Join us again tomorrow when we'll be exploring the secrets of money and investments. Goodbye for now.